Welcome to In Your Defense, Galveston and Beyond.
Hello and welcome to Defense on the Coast with Mark Diaz, a passionate criminal defense attorney with over 25 years of experience defending the rights of Texans. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's topic is going to be gun charges in Texas. Mark, welcome back.
Good to be back, Kevin.
All right, so can you explain the different types of gun charges in Texas and how they vary in terms of severity?
So in state, right, you have anything from a misdemeanor, unlawful carrying of a weapon, carrying a weapon in a prohibited place. And then the most common felony gun possession we get in state court is unlawful possession by a person with a previous felony. And so you're talking either misdemeanor or felony. The punishment for the misdemeanor being anything from deferred probation, time served, paying a fine. Sometimes, depending upon the circumstances, we get to do a class to get a dismissal. Sometimes we find that the weapon was indeed not illegal, not being illegally carried. We beat them to then the more difficult ones usually become a convicted felon carrying a weapon. A lot of times the state wants prison time on those depending upon the circumstances. We're also a lot of times able to get those reduced back down to a misdemeanor. Then the bigger issues, which I guess we can save for another day, are the way that guns impact federal cases. Because there you got more prohibited weapons. You've got enhancements that can happen for possessing a weapon during a drug crime. Like in the federal system, they are much more impactful than they are in the state court.
So as far as Texas law is concerned, do they differentiate between legal and illegal gun possession? What factors are considered when determining the legality of possession?
So there's more than one way to do that, right? So we have a license to carry in Texas, right? But then there are places that even if you have a license to carry, you're prohibited from carrying, right? Like a place that serves more or does more than 51% of their income in alcohol. In other words, a bar. Even if you have a license to carry, you can't carry your weapon in a bar because, I guess they're worried people will get drunk and start having shootouts. That's one way, right? The other way is, a good example, I guess, might be you can carry a weapon in your car without a license, right? But it's supposed to be concealed. In other words, it's not supposed to be sitting on the seat. And then the other way people with a license to carry get into trouble is you have a license to carry, but not while you're committing a crime. So a lot of people, this happens a lot, and we always take care of it, but a lot of people that have a license to carry are carrying, and then they get stopped for DWI, and they get arrested for DWI, and they get charged with unlawfully carrying a weapon. I usually always get that weapon case dismissed in that situation. Another not so common one anymore because of the way marijuana is being treated, but that was the same thing. Someone would get caught with marijuana, they have a license to carry, and they have a weapon with them. They were charging them with both. So the big one is obviously the use of a weapon to commit a crime. It's going to get you charged every time.
Can you talk about the concept of self-defense as far as gun charges go, and particularly in situations where a person is accused of using a firearm in a criminal manner?
That's a difficult one.
I've got all the hard-hitting questions today, Mark.
Well, I'm not sure I understand it, right? Because if you're in the commission of an offense, you're usually not going to have a self-defense. So
yeah, that's true.
If you're robbing a bank, how are you going to claim self-defense while you're in the middle of the bank robbery, right? Another big one that does happen a lot is, I told you before, people previously convicted of a felony cannot possess a weapon, right? And it's specifically in the statute that person cannot have a weapon and claim self-defense because they were prohibited from carrying a weapon in the first place. That's why I said it was a difficult question, because if you can't have one, you're never going to have self-defense. If you're in the middle of committing a crime, it would have to be a set of circumstances I can't think of right off the top of my head that you could claim self-defense while you were committing a crime. Right? The most common self-defense we think of is someone trying to break into your home.
Sure.
That type of stuff. And that's well known because they make so much media, right? Every time someone has a self-defense that I think most people understand that. So your question, I I can't think of a way unless you have another idea.
Since we're talking about the self-defense, in a situation where somebody uses a firearm in self-defense, like just use your example of someone breaks into their house, but it's not a legal weapon. I'm assuming I probably already know the answer to this. They probably get charges of illegal possession thrown at them in that scenario, right? Someone breaks into their house, they use a firearm to stop the intruder, and do they end up getting a gun charge because of that?
No.
Really?
But what do you mean by illegal weapon?
Well, like, let's say they have a weapon that's not, do they have to, I'm assuming they have to be registered in some way or something like that, or
Texas.
not in Texas. Oh, there's no registration. Okay.
Now, for a while, have you heard of a Glock switch?
Not up on my gun terminology.
There's this device that people made for Glock firearms, pistols, that would basically turn a Glock pistol into an automatic.
Okay. Yep.
So
I have heard of that before. Does that have a different name? I feel like I've heard it. Is that? I don't know. Maybe I've definitely heard of that before. But yes, continue, please.
So possession of a switch is an offense, right? It's possession of a prohibited weapon.
Okay.
In that scenario, I could see someone getting charged. Hopefully, I don't know. I haven't heard of it happening, but most people, our weapons restrictions are so loose in the state of Texas that it's probably not going to happen. But
yeah,
most people don't use illegal weapons for home defense.
Yeah, and if you don't even have to have stuff registered, then there's not much of a reason to have an illegal weapon, I suppose, unless you're technically not allowed to. Like if you said if you're a felon, you can't have one. So in that scenario, obviously, you would get into some trouble for having that weapon.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. What are the consequences of carrying a firearm in prohibited areas in Texas, a school, a government building, or the like?
Yeah, you get charged with carrying a weapon in a prohibited area. It's a misdemeanor.
So it's a fairly small offense.
It is, but you also, again, have to remember where we are. I mean, we have open carry in Texas. Now, where we are, you don't see it often, but there are guys that wear their gun on their holster out every day, and that's legal. I mean, until you go to a prohibited area. So we're pretty light on gun control here in the state of Texas.
Right. Yes. Especially compared to something like a place like California or something.
Right.
If a business doesn't want people bringing guns in, like let's say somebody owns just, I don't know, some knickknack store and they don't really want guns in there. If they post a sign and someone comes in with a gun, is that technically against the law?
There was a time when it was, but now that's gone away as well.
Okay.
So when they took that away is when they came up with specifically in the statute prohibited places.
Okay. And what are some of the other prohibited places? Government buildings,
Everything
schools,
churches, places of education, bars, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, bars. So it's only if 51% or more of the revenue is based on alcohol, not food, correct?
Correct. So if it's like, your nicer restaurants that also happen to have a bar, but their main income is food, you can carry in there. I mean, yeah, their main product is food. You can carry in there.
Do you have to have a license to carry?
No, that you used to. Now you do not.
Okay.
There are some reasons to be licensed. For instance, I'm licensed. So in order to get licensed, you have to go through some class, right? You have to go through some testing. It's been so long that I've been licensed that I don't know. Yeah, you still have to shoot. You have to shoot with someone. You have to hit, certain amount in the target. In other words, you have to show proficiency with the weapon. And then if you encounter law enforcement, like when you get pulled over, you have to give, along with your driver's license, your license to carry. There's an attitude that law enforcement appreciates those of us that are licensed, one, because we're telling them, but two, because they know that we've gone through the training at least to be responsible with the gun ownership and whatnot. So I'll keep mine, but you don't have to be licensed anymore. When I got my license, you had to have a license to carry. Back then it was called a concealed handgun license. Now it's just called a license to carry. Okay.
Maybe give me a top one or two infractions or cases that you get.
I get a lot of felon in possession of a weapon.
What would that be when you're someone like a felon who's not supposed to have a weapon?
Correct.
Okay.
I get a lot of those. And then I get a lot of like I told you, DWI, and they have their gun. In other words, I guess I should clarify for you. I don't get a lot of gun cases that aren't attached to something else.
Right.
I can't think of any that I've had in recent times that had nothing to do with some other activity. I can tell you one I had recently that I thought was ridiculous and I got it dismissed. But this guy, he drove a, what do you call, the Fast and the Furious type cars?
I know what you're talking about, but yeah, like the one, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I don't know the name.
He has like a souped up Toyota Supra or something.
Yeah.
He took off from a stoplight and burned out when he took off. So the officer pulled him over for the racing, but he wasn't racing. He just burned out and arrested him for racing and possession of a weapon, unlawful carrying a weapon, because he was carrying the weapon while he was committing a crime of racing. And so I got that one dismissed. But it's always, gun cases are usually always connected to some other activity.
If someone is facing any sort of charges that go a lot, that where there's a gun issue associated with it, does it change the way you approach a case, or are they considered separate issues?
Can be. And sometimes the way the state will negotiate the case is, I'll give you what you want on the main charge if your client will agree to forfeit their weapon. That happens. So they are separate charges, but when they're related, it always comes into play somehow. But like in the case I gave you a while ago, the guy wasn't racing per the statute. And so he wasn't committing criminal activity. So I got that case dismissed, which also meant they had to dismiss the gun case.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Defense on the Coast with Texas criminal defense attorney Mark Diaz. To connect with Mark, you can visit texascriminaljustice.com. And please like and subscribe to our channel. We love having you be a part of our community. Mark, I always love talking to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.